Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, Liberia congratulates the People's Republic of China for convening this timely debate and commends His Excellency Wang Yi for presiding. We also thank the Secretary General for his important briefing and the key critical points outlined today. Liberia is one of only 4 original African signatories to the UN Charter. We understand what it cost the world to build this institution, and we approach this debate as a founding member for whom the Charter is not symbolic. It is a covenant to be upheld and preserved with essential reasoning. No nation, however powerful, has the right to unilaterally render the world unsafe. Today, that covenant is under strain. A divided Security Council is deepening global uncertainty. Crises from Gaza to Ukraine have exposed persistent divisions, including vetoes that have hindered necessary interventions. Across Africa, from Sudan to the Sahel to the Great Lakes, conflicts continue to worsen and drive displacement. What this council increasingly lacks is not rules or principles, but the political will to apply them consistently and impartially, as speakers before me have mentioned. Liberia knows the value of a united and decisive council. When our state collapsed, United Nations peacekeeping created the space for peace, for dialogue, reconciliation, and the rebuilding of our institutions. Our experience shapes how we understand Article 1 of the Charter. The maintenance of international peace and security is not only an aspiration for some, but it is an obligation for all. Allow me to offer 3 reflections. First, the Charter is not only a legal instrument, it is a moral architecture. Selective multilateralism, where rules are invoked when convenient and bypassed when inconvenient, undermines the credibility of the entire system. The normalization of inconsistency itself is a dangerous precedent. Second, the Charter's promise of peace is inseparable from justice. Insecurity emerges from poverty, inequality, exclusion, and the mismanagement of our natural resources. The Charter's provisions on development and human rights are not peripheral. They are foundational. The future authority of this organization will depend on whether it can bridge the divide between security and development. Third, the Charter assumes good faith. Without a minimum threshold of trust, even the most carefully crafted rules lose their force. The Charter challenges us not only to comply, but to believe in the possibility of cooperation even amid disagreement. Mr. President, therefore, Liberia makes the following calls. First, honor the Charter's provisions. Article 27.3 requires that a party to the dispute abstain from voting on related council decisions. While we thank the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for leading us to the 2024 Pact for the Future, let's be reminded what the Pact for the Future means. It reinforces this obligation. We urge all members to implement it fully and without selectivity. Second, strengthen veto accountability. General Assembly Resolution 76262, which mandates a debate following any veto, must be treated as a serious accountability mechanism rather than a procedural formality. Third, invest in African-led peace architectures. The African Union Silencing the Guns Initiative, ECOWAS-led interventions have all demonstrated effectiveness and legitimacy. Coming in here today, we met Abdul Salam, a Nigerian in the UNDSS, in the security force here at the UN. He took a bullet in Liberia when he was the first group on the ground as ECOMOG, the ECOWAS intervention in Liberia. These mechanisms, however, require predictable, sustainable financing, not episodic attention. Fourth, and perhaps most fundamentally, we must address the conditions under which the Secretary General can exercise genuine independence. The Charter tasked the Secretary General with acting in the interest of the organization above all else. That is a custodial role with direct bearing on this institution's capacity to maintain peace and security and uphold the purposes that member states and the peoples they represent committed to in 1945. Yet, that custodial role is compromised when structural incentives pull in a different direction. A Secretary General seeking reappointment has every reason to avoid the decisions that genuine reform demands. Because real reform unsettles entrenched interests and asks powerful actors to accept discomfort for the sake of institutional health. The possibility of a second term is, in practice, a quiet constraint on the courage the moment requires. We therefore pose this openly. Should the next Secretary General not consider making the ultimate institutional sacrifice, committing fully to reform in a first term, even at the cost of a second? Should this Council not think beyond established practice and delve into uncharted territories regarding options for UN reforms? There is no precedent for what this organization now faces. The only comparable moment is the one that gave birth to United Nations itself, when the world looked at the wreckage of the League of Nations that lacked the will to reform from within. It was replaced with what we have today. We cannot afford that conclusion again. We must fix the institution we have with the urgency the task deserves. Mr. President, the question of Security Council reform remains urgent. Effectiveness cannot be sustained without legitimacy, and legitimacy cannot endure without representation. When the Charter was adopted, much of Africa was not represented. Today, the continent is central to the Council's agenda, yet remains underrepresented in its permanent membership. The Common Africa position, as articulated in the Eswatini Consensus, is clear. Africa seeks no fewer than 2 permanent seats with full prerogatives, including the veto, alongside additional non-permanent seats. This is not a demand for privilege, but a call for equity rooted in the principle of sovereign equality, something the UN Secretary General Guterres continues to iterate. Member states seeking a permanent seat should not be coupled with the rights of Africa. The situation of injustice to Africa needs to be dealt with separately. Reform is also about conduct. The use of the veto carries moral consequences. When exercised in situations involving mass suffering, it raises fundamental questions about the balance between power and responsibility. The relationship between the Council and regional bodies should be one of partnership, not delegation. Mr. President, the UN is at crossroads. The Secretary General's term ends later this year. He's given us the pact for the future. He's giving us many ideas about what needs to be done. Now the choice of a new leader cannot be separated from the question of what we're asking them to lead. A machinery that cannot deliver on the promise of peace, security, and human dignity does not uphold the Charter, but betrays the peoples in whose name it was written. We the peoples. The words with which the Charter opens is not cliche. Those words represent the mother in Sudan who has fled from her home 3 times. It represents the child in Gaza who has known no day of life without fear. It represents the civilian in Ukraine who has to endure another winter of war. They are the community in the Sahel who looks at the institution for protection. When we debate the purposes and the principles of this Charter, we are debating the conditions of human lives. Is it not time for us to pause and reset to avoid a similar fate of the League of Nations? Are we prepared to give the next Secretary General the freedom in the new thinking that new times and new realities demand? This would not be weakness, but rather strength in giving we the peoples what we deserve. A more representative, a more responsive and accountable United Nations is within reach if we collectively summon the will to achieve it. Let us reaffirm not only the words of the Charter, but the values that give those words meaning. In doing so, we'll not only preserve the legacy of those who founded this organization, we'll answer to those who are in the most need of this organization. If it's not done now, then when? And if it's not done by us, then by who? I thank you.